Hello, everyone, and welcome. You have chosen the SCS City Sports Podcast, your destination for local sports news, be it high school, be it professional, or whether you just want to listen to us ramble on about professional wrestling or old Seinfeld quotes or crazy movies that we all like. Welcome to the SCS City Sports Podcast, brought to you by the fine folks at Gary Thacker Insurance over at 2382 Battlefield Parkway. You can reach them at 706-866-8283. Also, the Chattanooga Flower Market, 8016 East Brainerd Road, 423-899-2440. Phil's Primetime Pizza down in beautiful Chickamauga, Georgia, 122 Gordon Street. That's 706-375-4448. Our good friend Greg Payne, host of Restricted to the Dugout with Greg Payne and the Payne Mortgage Team. You can reach them at 423-645-9404 for all of your mortgage needs. And finally, Choo Choo Barbecue, who make it possible for us to bring you the scoreboard on Friday nights. The Choo Choo Barbecue of Chickamauga scoreboard. You can reach them at 12960 U.S. Highway 27 at 706-375-7675. And as Ringo Rob likes to say, you don't know Q until you know Choo Choo. We also want to say a special thank you to Matthew Mays and the good friends and members of Jupiter Coyote, one of our favorite bands, and they provide the music for the show. Those guys have always been great to us, and we hope you guys will reach out and try to check out their music as well. So sit back and relax and hold on, and we'll see where we get to. And welcome everybody to this Wednesday afternoon, just under 4 o'clock on January the 4th, 2023. That feels odd to say 2023. I'm not quite used to that yet. I'm sure it's not a new year to me until I've written the previous year at least 475 times on pieces of paper and had to scratch it out.
I am happy to say, and I'm being honest, I did not one time write 2021 or 2023 any time during 2022.
And that's pretty strong as a newspaper man.
I successfully pulled that off.
Yeah, I mean, I will. I'm telling you, I go back to work tomorrow. I've got some grading and some stuff I've got to take care of. I guarantee you, at least once, I will do it. If not 3 or 4 times, we'll see. But, you know, I mean, guys, let's be honest. In the sports world, it was a pretty exciting end to the year. As usual, the SEC took a big, giant dump in the bowl games with the exception of just a few. But for the most part, I don't know what it is. I guess it's just because they feel like they don't have anything to play for. But
it warmed my heart, to be honest.
But you know, we had a good, I'll tell you, those 2 semifinal games, that first one was great.
Unbelievable.
The second one was even better. It was kind of like, you know, the first one went out there and, you know, like the old scene on the Cosby Show where the little old man was doing the tap dancing and he looks over at Bill and says, "Challenge!" And it's like the first game said that to the second game and the second game said, "Oh, well. How about we take her to the last play?"
And that's the way we want it to be. Even though if we're debating that 4th team or that 3rd team getting in, we want it to play out to be really good football, and we got the opportunity to see that. And the early line, I saw an early line on Georgia at 18, but it already fell about 4 points.
Yeah, it's down to 13 last I saw.
So I haven't seen TCU play a lot, but what I have seen, I think they can give Georgia a heck of a ball game.
Yeah
well, if they're allowed to come out. If Georgia comes out and starts slow the way they did against Ohio State, it could be the same type of ball game. I mean, because there was no doubt in that TCU-Michigan game, by God, TCU came out from the first horn and said, "We're here to play, we belong, and we're going to show you why."
And that's what a team is like when they show up with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Chances are, Scott and Rusty, they don't have Georgia athletes on that squad. Chances are Georgia didn't look at any of those players when they were recruiting. But that coach has found a way to push the right buttons, and they got some good ball players. And if most of them came out of the state of Texas, they're probably pretty good high school football players that turned into college
And that
kids.
was a team that Gary Patterson was the head coach, very, very, very successful, and they let him go. And brought in Sonny Dykes, you know, who had run all those high-powered offenses at Texas Tech, and God, look where they are. They're 60 minutes away from being a national champ.
Well, and that's the thing is, I think there's a lot of people out there that don't follow sports the way a lot of us do, and they see a TCU and they think, oh, it's just flavor of the month. That's not the flavor of the month. TCU, that program has been slowly building to get where it's at. What do you say, Scott? 15 years or so? I mean, it reminds me.
Not that long, but at least for
well,
about a decade.
I was going to say, it reminds me a lot of like Boise State.
And right. And I think what took place in Patterson being let go, they slumped 1 year and they just said, this ain't us.
Yeah.
We're not going to deal with 4 losses.
Yeah.
And get going.
But you can't fault the championship committee when you look and you watch those 2 games between those 4 teams played the way they were played. I mean, I don't see I don't see anything. Now, what I would say is, if Ohio State is the 4th team, I don't know that I necessarily saw that. I think TCU got the benefit of the doubt because they were already ranked higher.
And they did not want to see those 2 teams
and they
play.
did not want to see Michigan and Ohio State play again, because I think what you watched on Sunday night or Saturday night was the national championship game. I think that game between Georgia and Ohio State.
It possibly was, Rusty. And I also think, I'll ask this, I mean, this year's TCU, is that not last year's Cincinnati? That really the committee had their way, that they wouldn't want to put them in there, but at the same time they just couldn't find a way to deny them.
Well, they are playing in a Power 5 conference. It wasn't like Cincinnati coming out of the American Athletic Conference with no precedent to have a team from that conference in there. I think, look, and people can talk about Alabama all they want. They're a really good team, and they probably would have done, had a great game too. I think the best 4 teams got in. I think the best and most 4 deserving teams got in. Alabama, they lost 2 games on the last play of the game on the road. You still lost the ball game.
It's an argument, but
I'm sorry. That's the way the system is now. Now, when it changes and they go to 12 teams, maybe they play their way into the Final Four. TCU did what it had to do. TCU's only loss came in overtime of the conference championship game on a play. I still don't know why they didn't kick the field goal and
Scott,
they went for the touchdown.
And to a certain degree, the committee really, really, really did not want TCU there over in Alabama. They just couldn't. They just couldn't find the argument that was bona fide to put Bama in.
If they had gotten blown out by about 14, 17 points, something like that, Alabama would have been there. I think they really would have. But I mean, it came down. TCU is 1 play from an undefeated season. 1 play from an undefeated season. And Alabama's maybe 2 plays from an undefeated season. One's better than 2.
And you could argue the point that if Bama would have got in this tournament, they might win it. You could argue they have that ability on the sidelines to win a national championship.
Absolutely. But like I said, the 4 teams, I don't have any problem with the 4 teams that got in there. I thought they were probably the most deserving 4 teams that got in. And we were rewarded with 2 of the best college football games I've seen in a while.
And again, started out at an 18-point line. It's down to what Rusty's talking about, 13. That may travel a little bit further. I hope we see a really, really entertaining ball game, and I hope Georgia doesn't go out there and just wipe the floor with them. But I think this TCU team is an underrated bunch of players, and Georgia better pay attention in film session of who they really are. And I believe Kirby will have them do it now.
I said to, Scott was over here and we watched the game. I said to a couple of people that night, I was like, when you have a month to prepare for another team,
that's a long time.
That is a long time. And a good coach giving a month to prepare.
Yeah.
Now, a good coach on a really good football team, as Kirby Smart is, probably wouldn't up burning the midnight oil as much as maybe the Ohio State staff was, because Georgia didn't have as much to prove in that game, so to speak. Because I don't think that UGA was as prepared for Ohio State as Ohio State was for them. Now, what you saw happen in that game was eventually superior athletes start to get it together and make their adjustments on their own. But that game never got out of hand either way for either team. I mean, the biggest lead at any given time was, 14 points, 13 points. Good game all night.
Unlike the sport of baseball, that sometimes there's too much rest before we play. Just using opportunity, the Braves are hitting the ball, and all of a sudden they get a layoff and they go back and they can't find a base hit.
Yep.
And sometimes that month's a long time for those kids to
messes with
not
your
be
timing.
back out there doing the thing. And they're working on things in practice, but there's still a difference out there.
You can't simulate.
You can't simulate live competition. No, you cannot.
So you can get rusty.
You could try.
Absolutely.
I mean, you got the athletes at Georgia to play ones versus ones, but then you're going to risk somebody getting hurt.
That's the big thing there is you're risking. And it's something too. Rob, you brought up. Was it next year they expand? Is it next year they expand or the year
2
after?
years,
2 years. Okay,
possibly.
So 2 years they expand. Let's say
or
they expand to 12 or 16 or whatever they particularly expand to.
Going to 12.
It goes back to that whole adage that Chris Berman used to say years ago on ESPN, and that was that's why they play the game. To me, regardless, if you take the top 12 teams in the nation, those are the top 12 teams in the nation for a reason. You put those 12 teams together, and you're going to wind up with some crazy results at the end because you're going to get some teams that have never had a sniff of the spotlight. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, they're like, hey, this is...
You're going to have an underdog step
We're
up.
Leaving it all on the field tonight.
Yeah.
What's Dan Fouts say in The Water Boy? They let it all... they didn't hold anything back.
Because they didn't hold anything back.
We get it, Dan. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, when you give those teams like that have never had those opportunities, it makes a huge difference. And I'm excited to see what that might potentially do. Now, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't watch half of the bowls. I watch the later ones. I watch the New Year's Day ones. I watch the when I watch the New Year's Eve ones.
A lot of those early ones.
But I could care less about the Weed Eater Bowl and the Poinsettia Bowl and the Food City Bowl and all that mess.
And let me give you an example. And I thought of this, Scott, too. What is the great lure to ask 2 6-6 teams to come up to Boston in January, late December, and play a ball game? They don't even give them a nice destination to go to.
They just write them a fat check.
It's for television. It's for
We saw some other teams playing
kids
out.
Might get some
great cold
swag
weather
out of it.
Put them somewhere nice they want to be.
Here's the bottom line: right now, with the I'll finish my thought and saying, go ahead. I got that.
Well, again, my comment there, Rusty. I mean, to go. Oh, there's a better one. Yeah. There's a bowl in Idaho.
Oh yeah.
Now, how desperate are we to go play in that bowl?
It's real easy for me to look at my list of potential destinations and say, okay, I can go play in the Honolulu Bowl. Okay, yes, absolutely, check. I can go play in any of the Florida bowls, and there are many.
Sure.
Any of the California bowls, and there are many. Right. Absolutely, take me any of those places.
The Bahamas starts the bowls off as it's the worst bowl in the world. It's one of the best destinations.
Absolutely,
that those 6 and 6 teams get together.
To go to the Bahamas.
I mean, those are places that you're like, hell yeah, let's go. I'm down. But you're right. I mean, yeah, hey, let's go to. What if there was one in like Newfoundland? It's the Newfoundland Bowl.
Well, again,
we got to scrape 18 inches of snow off the field.
Again, for the 4,000 people that are in attendance watching that game, it kind of shows you how much interest there is in this bowl. And as a major sponsor,
how much exposure are you really? But the thing about it is as football crazed as the people of the United States are, if you put football in any incarnation on television, people are going to watch it. It don't matter. I mean, because you know what? We sat here and talked about watching the XFL.
But here's the thing.
Mostly you, but...
Well, the college football playoff has rendered every bowl game, except the semis and the final, obsolete.
Yep.
They do not matter at all whatsoever.
True.
Even
as lustrous as the Orange Bowl used to be.
Yes. I've been debating people about that. Well, Jalen Hyatt and all these guys should have played. For what? It doesn't mean anything except for a bowl of oranges. That's all that matters. I'll revise that a little bit. It matters to the schools because for that one night, for those 3.5 hours, their game is probably the only one on television.
True. Nationally publicized.
And you get some television exposure for your program and your university that you wouldn't get otherwise.
And I think Heupel must have done a nice job making that game important to his kids.
Yeah. It's a big opponent. I mean, it was, Clemson's won 2 national championships in the last half dozen years. But you take even a minor bowl game like the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, Louisiana. Not the biggest destination to ever go to, but for those 3 hours, Ball State, MTSU, whoever's in the ball game, hey, that's an opportunity for us to be seen, not by the big recruits who aren't going to come here, but by the smaller guys.
Trivia of the Shreveport airport. Who is the biggest face that they're advertising in that airport?
I don't know who it should be. Kenny Wayne Shepherd.
No.
That's where he's from.
Terry Bradshaw.
Oh, yeah, that is true.
Well,
that's true. Forgot about him.
And you're right. I mean, if you're going to break out some really cool kick-ass uniform, that's the night you break it out. Any kind of recruiting tool that you have. And, you think about it, man. I mean, they've only played these bowl games the way they're playing them now for the last, 15, 18 years maybe or so? Because when we were kids, they played everything pretty much on New Year's Day and New Year's Eve.
There were about a week
because there wasn't all
wasn't stretched out 3
no
weeks.
I mean, but there wasn't all that crap. I mean, you think
had the
about
blue gray game on Christmas Day or Christmas
and
Eve,
that was like the All-Star game, right?
And where's that game go?
That's gone.
Just disappeared.
It's like it's the Senior Bowl or whatever now, I think.
Stuff.
But you think about it, when we were kids, Scott and Rob, you're not that much older than us. I mean, when we were kids, it was you had basically the Liberty Bowl, the Independence Bowl, Cotton Bowl, Orange.
Blue Bonnet.
The Blue Bonnet. The Rose Bowl. Tangerine Bowl. Sugar Bowl.
Gator.
Yeah, I mean, you had about 10.
Garden State Bowl Tennessee played in one year.
You had about 10 different ones, and that was really about it. 10, 12 or so. And now you've got, 20-something?
It was a reward for
Peach
a good
Bowl
season.
was an old bowl, too. But its value really escalated through the years of what that meant.
Peach Bowl's value got escalated when Chick-fil-A bought the rights to the Peach Bowl out and became a multi-million dollar. Same thing with, I mean, you think about it, the Fiesta Bowl was never much until Tostitos come in there, and it was the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl, and there were big-time money behind it. Same thing, all those games, that national championship rotation, all carry big-time national sponsorship.
Who was main sponsor in the one out in Memphis?
The Liberty Bowl?
For years, it was AutoZone.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is now. It used to be the AutoZone Liberty Bowl.
Well, I mean, that's like, USF.
Back then, you had to win probably at least 8 games to get in the bowl.
USF&G that sponsors the Sugar Bowl and has sponsored the Sugar Bowl forever.
Well, Allstate does.
Now it does now, but but think about it.
Who was it?
USF&G.
Oh.
Insurance company. I mean, okay, I didn't know who they were. I always did that one night, but there's just
take pretty good dollars to get your name on those big time bowls.
No, it's the same difference putting your name on those NFL stadiums.
Yeah,
well, maybe not as much as you think. Jimmy Kimmel sponsored a bowl. There's the Jimmy Kimmel Bowl. I'm not kidding. I'm not making it up.
Which one was that?
It was somewhere in California this year. I want to say he paid like $500,000 for the name.
Yeah, but do you think that he did it, or do you think ABC wrote that check for him?
Somebody
because
wrote a check.
That got their late night guy major publicity.
If I had to take a bet on that, I'd lend to Rusty's thoughts on that. Not that Kimball couldn't do it, but that was more the reason.
It's gotten out of hand a little bit. I watched the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and I love Duke's Mayo, but the winning coach had to get mayonnaise dumped on his head.
Oh, no, sir.
Yeah, that's true.
There was a guy in the stands that chugged a jar of it.
Oh, good God.
Jesus.
I would.
Why you're watching too many of the details.
I would.
And I found this out, too.
Take more
There
restroom
is no
breaks.
such thing as Cheez-Its. It's Cheez-It, singular, and if it's plural, it's Cheez-It crackers.
So you've been doing this wrong all your life.
Yes, I've been calling it Cheez-Its. It's not Cheez-Its. Officially, it's Cheez-It crackers.
Did you ever put that in an article that you have to go back and
I wish we should have. I mean, that would have. But
that'd make good reading there, Scott.
My favorite bowl name of all time had to be the San Diego County Credit Union Poinsettia Bowl. It had like 19 words or whatever to get to it. Or Poulon Weed Eater.
I was about to say the Poulon Weed Eater Bowl.
Now think about this though. That Hawaiian Bowl, which is not played in the same stadium. I don't know what stadium they're playing that in now because it ain't the same one.
They're tearing down Aloha Stadium, from what I understand. I think they play at the University of Hawaii Stadium.
Okay, well, it was a different stadium for certain, but just the cost to get teams across the Pacific like that. Now that
ain't cheap.
You're handing a team some money and they're
ain't cheap for two people.
They're spending it all on plane tickets.
You're talking about a plane ticket bill of it. By the time you count players, staff, and everything, you're probably you're pushing $100,000.
The money you got from them, you just gave back to
You're
Delta.
pushing $100,000 at least.
I was going to say, just talking about money though, we were there making, poking fun at the Poulon Weed Eater Bowl. How much exposure did Poulon Weed Eater get from that? We're still talking about it.
Well, I mean,
I don't even know if Poulon.
Well, I won't say we. Right now, it's you.
Think about the Outback Bowl. Outback Steakhouse bought those naming rights years ago.
But it wasn't the Outback Bowl this year.
Yeah, I know.
Something else.
But I'm saying though,
Outbacks gave it up after all these years.
Well,
Blockbuster used to have the Hall of Fame, Blockbuster Hall of Fame.
Look, y'all.
Which is no longer exists.
Well, you can understand why they don't have it.
It goes back into all that thing of eventually everything somehow prices itself out of the market. Mm-hmm. And I think the NCAA's got about another 4 or 5 years, maybe a little more, before they start getting things to a point where some of these national corporations are going to be like, that's a bridge I can't quite cross.
One night.
Now, I mean, I know there's a lot of companies that may come in, but I'll give you a good example. Look at NASCAR. 20 years ago, a NASCAR team had one sponsor for an entire season and got a ginormous fat check wrote to them. The driver made a big chunk off that, did a few personal appearances or whatever, but you had one sponsor all year long. And now you got teams that cobble together 2 race deals, 1 race deal, 4 race deals. So you got one guy that has 9 different paint schemes throughout a season because you priced yourself right out of the market.
I knew an insurance company many, many years ago, back when NASCAR was very popular in the early 90s, that was kicking around the idea of being a car sponsor. And I thought, well, that'll last about a week, because when they bring 2 cars that were busted up that week and ask for more money, they'll hop out of that idea real fast.
Absolutely.
That's not a short-term commitment.
Nope.
You better understand, there is, you hope to get it back, but you're going to have to dish out some money on a regular basis. And I knew that insurance company was way too stingy to keep doing that.
Well, you look at like the Super Bowl, for instance, and obviously, we've got the NFL playoffs are coming up here in a couple of weeks, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we move along. But you look at something like the Super Bowl; it's a one-night event. Advertising on that one night, everything else pales in comparison to that one night of the year. I mean, that is, not only is it the Super Bowl of American football, but it's the Super Bowl of American advertisement. That's the night that everybody throws the best commercial they could possibly throw on there. And you look at, go all the way back at early ads in Super Bowl history comparable to what ads now cost. And that's
why you see about 6 of the big boys.
That's why you see,
participate.
you see 5 or 6 companies that can, you're always going to get, a new Coca-Cola campaign. You're going to get a new Budweiser campaign. You're going to get Nike, Apple. You're going to get the really, really big dogs. You don't have any more of the days where some little upstart can come in there and blow $100,000, but get $10 million worth. Yeah, I mean, you'll get them.
I've noticed in the last few years, there's still some new startup companies and stuff that'll just go for broke and throw it all
I was going to
out.
say, because you've had but
it's a gamble.
But you absolutely,
it is. But at
it's
the same
not
time,
for Budweiser. It's not for Coca-Cola.
No, for them it's a throwaway check.
But when you got the opportunity for a brand new company, yes, we're probably going to spend $2 million on this that we may not have, but it's going to get our company out in front of 110 million people.
But the problem
that you
is,
hope remember
that you
hope
if
remember.
you're memorable enough, then
But see, the problem there is, and the same thing is, it's what you're going to get before it's all said and done with bowl games and stuff like that as well, is you're going to eventually get to a point to where the few big ones call up the company and say, what would it take for me to be the only steakhouse that sponsors this event? What would it be for me to be the only drink? Because Coke and Pepsi don't like to sponsor the same things. Budweiser and Miller don't sponsor the same things. That's the problem, because you have too many that are willing. The big dogs are willing to say, hey, I'm BP. I'll write you a fat enough check to where you can't talk to Exxon.
Scott, do you feel comfortable telling the Scenic City folks out there what you told me about the cost that Atlanta Falcons were charging GHSA to keep them from taking on that deal?
Oh, reportedly it was $500,000-$600,000.
Yeah, to ask for the GHSA, who's getting the money virtually from the high schools itself, to come up with $600,000 to have 3 nights at that event, and then you shared with me that I think in Texas, and Jerry Jones, who's got a lot of money himself, just gave it to him.
He built that new.
That's what I've heard. That new
wouldn't
charge
surprise me.
$1, and that may be wrong. But
I wouldn't think that it is, because that new practice facility that they built over there in Frisco has like 9 football fields on it. Yeah. It was built, and each one of those football fields has its own set of stands and everything. That facility was built for youth sports, and they had to, and Jerry Jones is a smart enough owner to realize that the heart and soul of Texas is football.
Yeah.
And the kids are the next wave. I mean, he knows what he's doing. Master marketer.
And that's not a bad place that they play the state finals at, Scott, except for the elements that could take place.
Yeah.
And they did on Friday night. It rained like all get out. But I remember just the talk about, let's go to the Dome. Even talking back as far as Ridgeland's last appearance there, let's make it to the Dome. Let's make it to the Dome. I don't hear him say, let's make it to Georgia State's facility.
Yeah.
Okay, but $600,000+, you're basically shunning the high school.
Yeah, and they've now
worked out.
They've now worked out a deal where they're going to do it. Now, of course, people are mad because now it's on it's going to be, unless something changes, it's going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Which people are like, I can't take off work, and I was going to make a weekend of it. Well, you don't own the stadium.
Obviously, something to do with the Falcons being scheduling there.
That and the SEC Championship, it's like the weekend before, and they got other stuff that's going on. So, if you don't own that stadium, you're going to have to play when they tell you.
What that has to do with is Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night are going to be 3 of your least popular concert nights of the week. And Mercedes, when they do host concerts, host big-time acts that pay big-time money to come and sing. So that way they're not missing the act that you would get on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday sometimes in a venue that size pales into what you would get in the venue that size on Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Well, and then Scott's going back, and he's bringing back when it was at the Georgia Dome. It was a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right, Scott?
It was Friday. I think it was just Friday and Saturday back then. I think they've added 3 days because now we have more classifications. Now we also have flag football to go with it and stuff like that.
Well, let's talk about the other big piece of news over the weekend. And you'd have to pretty much been hiding underneath a rock somewhere to have not heard about this, because it's been on every major news channel that I can think of, and that is the injury to Damar Hamlin of the Buffalo Bills, which happened Monday night live. I was not watching the game at the time. My daughter was watching the game. She came running in there with her phone, goes, "Dad, watch this." Yeah. And as I told Scott today, I watched the hit, and I thought, well, what am I watching? And then I saw the young man stand up and then immediately fall back over, and I thought, oh, hell, this is bad.
Well, and we're none of us are doctors, so we don't understand, exactly did he, was that going to happen walking to the locker room, or did it take that conflict of running into another human being at that force to cause that? And that's what we can certainly assume at this point in time. And it's something that we've seen legs get broke, and we've seen people unfortunately get head injuries and leave, and they this one was
this a little different
to watch out there to see that go on, and that type of medical activity have to take place, because when we see somebody go into that type of work, we know that they're trying to save a life at that moment.
I've never seen CPR have to be done on the field.
Not on the NFL field, no.
And I think Ryan Clark was talking about it later after the game on SportsCenter. You're conditioned as an NFL player. You see guys get their knees blown out and their arms broken, and you even see head and neck injuries. But they put them on the stretcher, and the guy gives a wave or a thumbs up, and he lets somebody know, hey, I'm going to be fine. This is just a stinger or whatever. This was a totally different situation. Yeah. This guy goes down, and immediately they realize what was going on, and you can see them performing CPR. It, had a defibrillator and everything, and his heart stopped, on the field of play, and that's not something you're prepared to see. And there was no way they were going to play that game again.
Well, and I don't know that there is a protocol, a set of rules right then, Scott. Joe Buckingham said, well, they got 5 minutes to get ready and start again. Well, that really wasn't the plan.
And there's still a lot of debate about that. The NFL's saying that was not the case. That had never been the case, and people are taking the NFL to task because Buckingham reported that, but they had to get that from somewhere.
Sure, they didn't make that up.
So I don't know where that came from.
Or they could have got that from a producer or something that wasn't properly informed.
Well, I figure the broadcast, ESPN, they're attuned to the league office. So, if they're getting that information, that's where it come from. Because I don't think they would just put that out there and say, hey, this is standard protocol. Because that wasn't standard protocol. This is never... Well, I take that back. It has happened. It has happened once before. There was a Detroit Lions game. I want to say 1971. I can't remember the player's name. I want to say his name was Hughes, maybe Jim Hughes, something like that. He had a heart attack and he died on the field. They were playing the Bears. But
that was the last death in NFL history.
Yeah, but that was from an unrelated heart condition that nobody knew about.
And another one that pops in my head, and I think this took place back in the 70s, Darryl Stingley. Becoming paralyzed. I don't remember when he left the field, if they knew the circumstances. They probably didn't.
The one thing I was reminded of was, well, I guess the only thing that's comparable to it that I've seen in my lifetime was back in the 89-90 college basketball season with Loyola Marymount. And if some of you are old enough to remember that, Loyola Marymount had this, it was a mid-major basketball team. Paul Westphal used to coach the Lakers. He had this run-and-gun style. They were jacking up three-pointers, scoring 100 points a game, and they had this incredible season. And they had 2 players that were destined for the NBA. One was a point guard named Bo Kimball, who kind of ran the show. And then they had a 6'8" power forward named Hank Gathers, who was probably going to be a lottery pick and probably a high lottery pick. And it was an entertaining team to watch, and ESPN was starting to show more and more of their games because they were putting up a lot of points. They were drawing a lot of interest. And one night, and I don't think this particular game was being aired. They were playing like Long Beach State or somebody like that. All of a sudden, they cut in on SportsCenter, and they're showing there was a play. He's running back down the court, and he just stumbles and falls.
Hadn't he just dunked the previous play?
Yeah.
He had gone up for the dunk. He came back down and started the trot, and it slowed into a step and he fell over.
And I don't think he died on the court, but they took him to the hospital, and he died shortly thereafter.
I was going to say he died within hours.
And that was, of course, we didn't have social media back then, but I just remember being glued to that for all night waiting on, other updates and stuff like that. The only other thing that I can remember that comes close to that is Len Bias.
Yeah.
86.
That was on a practice, wasn't it?
He had gotten drafted. This was like a day after the draft or something, and he was at a party, and took some drugs and killed him.
Well, the difference there was Len
And he was
Bias
supposed
was
to be-
self-induced. I mean, he
Yeah.
was the Celtics
But to
savior.
have an athlete of his caliber,
absolutely.
he was the next NBA star. He was already being compared. This guy is going to give Jordan a run.
Frosty, as they called him.
Yeah, and he didn't even make it to the first practice.
No.
But just to have somebody just keel over like that.
Well, Reggie Lewis
I forgot about Reggie Lewis. Yeah,
collapsed in Celtics practice. They didn't even realize, and it had happened several times. They didn't even realize Reggie had a heart problem.
Yeah.
And passed out in practice one day, and he got diagnosed, and he continued to play, knowing that the doctors didn't want him to play because of love of the game. And of course,
Well, we've heard those stories, guys.
and of course we
where-
don't know what's happened, what the actual diagnosis is yet.
Oh, no, we don't. And we've heard these stories where some event took place, and then they came back and later and said, well, he actually had that problem.
Mm-hmm.
It would eventually have been a problem, but it happened tonight, and they haven't come out and said so. And actually, I've heard some promising mentions that vitals and signs from the doctors are looking encouraging, and we hope.
Friend of
certainly
his,
that'll be
friend of the
the case.
family, and I think his uncle even spoke to NFL Network last night. Apparently, overnight last night, they reduced his oxygen levels down to 50%.
which means he's starting to breathe on his own.
Well, he's still on a ventilator. He's still sedated. He's still in ICU, but he was at 100% oxygen when they came in, and they've taken it down to 50. So that's encouraging.
Oh, that's a very positive sign.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
Yeah. Very positive sign. And Scott and I talked about this, and I'm not, I don't want to break too far off onto a tangent when it comes to all this mess, but I've seen a lot of the tweets and stuff that went out and all, and granted, there are some controversial figures in the media that we talk about on the show pretty regularly, guys like Colin Cowherd, and we've talked about Paul Feinbaum before, and where we think they kind of took the business, here and there, and we can say a lot of that stuff tongue in cheek because, even as much as some of their stuff pisses us off of how stupid it is, it's not disrespectful in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But I'm not a big Bayless guy. I never have been much of a big Skip Bayless guy. But sometimes I feel like it's the old Herm Edwards thing of don't hit send.
I was just about to say.
If you can, and then the other part of that is if you can type out something like that and then unequivocally hit send, then you're a garbage human being, plain and simple. And I've never liked Skip. I'm probably never going to like Skip. But sometimes it's just I would, as I told Scott today, I would have loved to have been on the set of Skip and Shannon when Shannon comes back on that show and they have to sit face to face. He's not come back. Well, no, he's not come back yet.
Missed the first.
He missed it yesterday.
Okay,
and Skip came on the show. I don't watch the show, but I saw the clip, and he came on and he said, my partner Shannon Sharp is not here today. Hopefully he'll be with us tomorrow, and he apologized for
which he should have.
Yep.
Which he took those measures of apologizing for what he said.
And of course, the original tweet, was something to the effect of, about how we're going to get this game in. Although, and he put at the end, although it really doesn't matter, it's kind of irrelevant at this point. So he wasn't completely being callous and saying, hey, this kid
kind of using devil's advocate that there's a ball game that still somehow, some way has to be fit into the world, and because the dominoes won't fall in place if we don't do it.
But at the same time, while
Poor timing.
I was going to say, at the same time, while the whole world is literally sitting there watching this kid be worked on television, it might not be the best time to be bringing that kind of stuff up.
Now, I did hear today that there's a bunch of ideas still on the table, and Mike Florio talked about this on his show, and although he said this wasn't his idea, but he had heard this. One of the things that's being considered is they play Week 18 this weekend as scheduled, and then the next weekend will be the NFC wild card games, and they'll replay the Bills game, which will be a regular season game. Then the following weekend, they would play the 3 AFC playoff games. And then after that, you would have your divisional rounds and your championships.
So that actually doesn't put any team at any
the only thing that it would put, it would take away the bye week between the Super Bowl and the championship games. The only thing that it would do is it would give the number 1 seed in the NFC 3 weeks off between games. Now,
somebody's going to complain
that
about
could be
that.
good, that could be bad. If you're the Eagles and they get the number 1 seed and Jalen Hurts' shoulder is still messed up, it's probably a good thing. But at the same time, like we were talking about earlier, that's 3 weeks you're not seeing live contact.
Let me say something about that, too, that you can make the argument of, and we talked about that. If Jalen Hurts is going to take that long to get well, who is that Jalen Hurts then? Because that's a whole lot of football he ain't played in a long time.
Well, if Jalen Hurts is going to take that long to get that well, that shoulder injury is a whole lot more serious than the media is letting on.
Well, he supposedly could have played last week, and they decided not to. But now he's definitely supposed to be playing.
I was going to say
that's an alternative plan, but you're not going to make everybody happy. Somebody's going to find some fault in that. But there has to be some kind of adversity to that scheduling, because this is very unique.
Yeah, I mean, this is an unprecedented situation, and I don't know if the Bills would just forfeit the rest of the season, but I mean, they still. I mean, I think if he progresses in the hospital like they hope he will, and like he seemingly reportedly is starting to do, then maybe they can kind of
they're already
just a little bit and be able to try to play. But
they've already clinched playoffs, right?
Yeah, but that game between those 2 teams in Kansas City was pretty much going to help decide the number 1 seed.
Number 1 seed. I mean,
if those 2 teams weren't in the playoffs, they don't worry about it. Obviously, if those 2 teams had their playoff position already locked up,
not to take up for Bayless, Rusty, but I kind of think that in his thought process, I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt.
Yeah,
although it was poor timing, that's what he's talking about.
Yeah,
the magnitude of that ball game and the dominoes that have to fall in place. But again, poor timing.
We're still talking $1 billion organization here that is counting on all these games being played, and there's a lot at stake here.
Well, and the problem for Skip in that situation too is Skip is Skip.
Yeah.
If Skip was Joe Schmo from Pawtucket, Rhode Island, in some little small town paper, and he made that statement, ain't nobody gonna say a word. But Skip Bayless is known for saying dumbass things for a whole number of years. And he's got a microscope on him at all times when he opens his mouth.
Well, he was the only one that we've heard of that big institute that came out and said something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
but there might have been others in smaller markets that said something similar.
Well, there may have been, but the majority of them were smart enough not to throw it out there for everybody to read at the exact time that the stuff is happening. Most of them are going to sit back, take a deep breath.
Now, I was unaware of what you're just saying. You're telling me while the young man is still down on the field, he's
the game's not even over. Yeah, I mean, the game is still live on television when this tweet went out.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what time the tweet went out. And then, on the complete flip side, there's Dan Orlovsky on ESPN yesterday, literally leading a prayer,
absolutely,
on the air, which, I mean, it's amazing. You don't see stuff like that. It just tells you the magnitude of what we're seeing here. And yeah, look, sure, people have heart attacks and cardiac arrest every single day, every single minute, but nobody has had theirs on national television with that many eyeballs watching.
But
and there are people out there. I got in an argument with one today on Facebook. Nobody around here locally, well, there's plenty of people go through this every day. Not like that. They don't have their cardiac moment out there for the world
but
to
you
witness
don't
to.
also.
And it doesn't affect everybody because
how many people watch Monday Night Football? What's the ratings?
It's tens of millions worldwide. Yeah,
40.
I mean, and you got to
you got worldwide. Yeah, you're right.
And you got to remember too that for these men, that is having their worst nightmare played out right in front of them.
Yeah.
And if you think that any of those football players on that field went home and got a good night's sleep that night, unless it was, chemically helped with some sleeping pills or something like that, I'm telling you, that's no different than watching a race car driver hit the wall at 100 miles an hour and how the rest of the race car drivers all go stone silent because every one of them at that moment knows that could have just very easily have been me.
Yeah, that's their brother right there.
And
that's the guy they go to war with, and that's the guy they shoot every single day, probably as much, if not more, than their own wives.
And the answer to what you just said, Rusty, I heard that some of the Bills reportedly stayed in Cincinnati at the hospital. I don't know that was
Stephon Diggs.
Stephon Diggs showed up at the hospital.
Yeah.
ESPN's.
I think he stayed the whole night and most of the next day.
Well, his guy, one of their guys that was reporting, had to vouch because the security guard was trying to stop him.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, that's Stephon Diggs. I know who this is. And they finally let him in. And I heard the coach for Cincinnati, Zach
Taylor.
Yeah.
They were showing their press conference today, and he's like, he said, I won't disclose the personal conversations that we had on the field, me and Coach McDermott for the Bills. He said the only thing I will talk about is, he said the only thing that McDermott, well one of the things he said to him, talking about if they were going to play the game, he's like, I don't need to be here. I need to be at the hospital. And he said that just told me everything I need to know about what kind of guy this was, what kind of leader, coach this guy is. He said after that, I knew we weren't playing.
No, and I mean, I think once you saw, okay, so we've all seen over the years, ambulances pull onto football fields and take people off. Watch Michael Irvin get rolled off of the concrete in Philly with his face mask opened up, helmet still on a backboard. They rolled him off that field and they went right back to playing. That was an injury. We watched guys blow knees out. We saw guys break arms. We saw them,
I've seen kids in high school
we saw them throw them on the back of a golf cart and go. What we've never saw is just what you said. You've never seen in the modern era an EMT out there performing CPR on a player. Yeah. Now, I'm telling you right now, I don't give a damn what your job is. If you watch somebody go through that at your particular job, I don't know that you're necessarily going to be back to taking phone calls 5 minutes later and ready to be serious about something. That is life-altering to watch something like that live.
Yeah, and it's not the gentle thing you see on TV.
No.
I saw some reporter talk about it, said they have to do it hard enough to break ribs.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure he was probably had to cut his jersey open. Because if you saw, the people were telling the players to back up basically and form a wall. Mm-hmm. So the cameras couldn't get to it,
and give those players credit for doing that.
Yeah,
because you didn't see.
Nope,
anything.
You couldn't.
But Scott,
and Coach Taylor said today.
Don't you think the NFL would have been told not to do that?
Yeah, probably.
I mean, the NFL would have said we don't need that.
Probably.
Yeah.
And Coach Taylor today even said, he could not get over the composure that the medical personnel on the field. He said because he said all these players are breaking down and crying and freaking out. He said everyone. He said the Bills staff, our staff, everybody that was involved with that whole situation. He said there was no panic.
Yeah.
Nothing. He said they knew what they had to do. They did it. They kept.
But you're in their wheelhouse now, man.
Yeah.
I mean, when you get into that, you're in those people's wheelhouse now. That's their specialty.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. When if you're a human being and you're put in a situation like that. Just the instinct kicks in to do it.
And chances are they've had to do something like that, Rusty, that group of people maybe in the stands.
Oh, you take somebody off an ambulance and the things that person has seen is enough to probably put most people into shock for those people to tell you stories. So that begs the question. So I saw a picture. Somebody had posted it on social media the other day, and I really had forgotten all about it. And it was a picture of Steve Wallace, who used to be an offensive lineman for the 49ers back in the 80s and 90s. And, Scott, I know you'll remember who he was. He was the big old giant offensive tackle that wore that big, humongous foam pad.
It kept the Cowboys out of many of
kept
Super
them out
Bowls.
of a couple. But he wore that big old foam pad on his helmet because
big tackle.
He had bad migraines, and that helped on the impacts and stuff. Yeah. Now, granted, we've, supposedly in the modern era, we have these concussion-proof helmets, this, that, the other. But as you and I talked about off air, these players keep getting bigger, stronger, faster. The game keeps getting faster. You have to react 10 times faster than you did in the past. It's that much more violent because of all that strength, because of all that speed.
Tours keep coming just from falling onto the turf.
Yeah, I mean, it begs to differ, or begs to answer the question of, is this one of those moments that makes the NFL sit back and go, is there anything equipment-wise that we could have done that might have helped in that situation? Had that guy had on one of those foam covers on that football helmet and that young man got hit in the chest the way he did, does that happen the same way? Or was that just, as you and I talked about earlier, is that literally one of those one in a bit, to steal a Seinfeld reference, 1 in a million shot, Doc. But, I mean, really, it was the odds.
I'll answer it not knowing right or wrong, but I would say yes, because I think the continuation of them looking for safer equipment has always continued. So I do think that that's something that they would give thought to, even though it was possibly a very rare situation. I still think they will continue to give thought to what can we do to protect these players.
How many players show up wearing some type of vest now underneath? I mean, who is the first company that, there's your $1 million manufacturer, the first company to come in.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's be honest, there's been chest shields that we know. I mean, professional soccer players have worn them now for goodness, for
Scott,
what,
you're
30
you're a hockey guy. I would imagine, if you caught a puck from 25 feet out, it could stop a heart, right?
Oh yeah.
So I mean they've got equipment too,
and you have to sacrifice your body to block shots. I mean, they take them in the legs and the face and everything else. I don't know if any extra padding or protection that that hockey players are using right now, but man.
Well, I mean, soccer players wear those chest shields that look like bulletproof vests. I mean, I didn't even realize they wore that till I started watching the because I guess I really hadn't noticed it, but when I started watching that This Is Wrexham show on FX about Ryan Reynolds' soccer team, there was a locker room shot, and one of the players came in and threw his jersey, and when he threw the jersey off, he had that protective shield on. And I was like, well, I don't guess but of course, I mean, I know that if, a soccer ball off the right guy's foot, I mean, for that first, what? I mean,
especially if you didn't see that coming and caught you off guard.
Oh.
Flush. I mean, just think about a baseball being thrown 100 miles an hour and catching most baseball players are taught to turn away from the ball, but there's always that crazy moment that something might not go.
This could be one of those things that has ramifications throughout all sports
from an equipment standpoint.
Yeah,
but to answer your question, I do think the NFL learns from things that happen. I think all sports do.
I think
they may look into what can we do different.
Well, because no matter what, I mean, it boils back to the money, and you want the best product out on that field at all times, and you can't be having, you can't have things like this happen.
And just think about this. All the rules that had been going on for several years now to protect the quarterback to stay on the field. And look how many teams are down to their third quarterback. The Titans, Scott, your team is brought somebody out of the virtual stands to play quarterback, and lo and behold, he has to play. Yes, he starts in a game that means whether they're going.
Josh Dobbs.
That's where they're at.
Yeah, and I've been having this debate with other Titans people all year, and they got to fire the conditioning and strength staff because this is 2 years in a row they've led the league with injuries. How are you going to prevent any injuries in the NFL. I mean, first of all, like Treylon Burks got a concussion from a hit that should have been flagged for targeting. It wasn't. Tannehill got his ankle stepped on. This game is too big. It is too violent. It is too fast. The players look back in the 50s. If you weigh 220 pounds, you were one of the biggest linemen in the league.
Sure. Now
we got linebackers that are 6'7". The Andre Carter, the second kid from Army that got the exemption to go in the draft. You know, he's 6'7", 245 pounds, and he's a linebacker.
I didn't hear that. You mean the Army's allowing one of their people to go in the draft and not have to continue?
Possibly, yeah. He's supposedly going to be a top.
Roger Staubach's on line too right now. I want to have a discussion.
Well, and how about the guy at the Naval Academy that played basketball, the Admiral?
Derrick Henry is 6'4.5" and 257 pounds, and he's a running back.
Yeah.
I mean, look how big and strong and fast these players are. The collisions, the violent nature of this sport. I heard it described one time that essentially it's being in a 30-mile-per-hour car crash.
Every 30 seconds.
Every 30 seconds or a minute for over the course of 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
And they're, these guys aren't ready to go next week? No, they're not ready to go next week. Well, some of these guys can't get out of bed for 3 days.
And I heard somebody on ESPN allude to the fact that the Titans have been beat up on injuries the last 2 years due to the physical nature of their own style of play.
And that may be the case, but you know what?
That happens too.
I mean,
sure.
How many more years would Eddie George have been the best running back in all of professional football if he doesn't lose his fullback?
Oh yeah.
To take that initial hit on so many of those plays, to take that first.
Well, think about the tenure and time that your boy Emmett got to play in this game because of a fullback,
compared to Barry Sanders,
and a good
offensive line compared to Barry Sanders that didn't have one.
Walter.
Yeah, and Walter Payton, and I mean, any number of, and that's the thing too. Like, and I ain't gonna get on my soapbox too far when it comes to all this mess, but that goes back to, it in this modern era, because of technology, because of social media and everything, you can literally talk sports at all given time if you want to. You can talk about your favorite team as much as you want to. You can go down and you can deep dive every last friggin' stat that you can possibly find. ESPN does it all the time. This is Joe Schmo. It turns out that he's the only left-hander after 7:30 p.m. at night on January the 30th to throw 5 strikeouts in the history of Major League Baseball. It's BS like that because people buy it. But the problem is years ago, some genius at some company decided, you know what we really need to do? We need a comments section. That's what we need. We need a comment section so that all these people, instead of writing us letters and calling the television station, well, they'll just get it all out right here. And those have become just a hellscape of the worst people alive. Mm-hmm. No offense to Scott, because he gets on there and plays with them sometimes, and I do too. It's fun because you can get those people going in nothing flat. But we have all these people out there that, to hear them talk, by God, they can tell you well, you know what? The Titans would win the Super Bowl next year if we could just somehow get Tom Brady, and then if we could just trade so-and-so for, this guy, that guy. I mean, if they just reduce that salary cap and we get this guy, that guy, we trade this one for that one. And
my favorite is, am I not entitled to my own opinion? And I shoot back, yeah, you're perfectly entitled to your own opinion. I never said you could. But I'm also entitled to say that your opinion sucks.
Yeah, your opinion's dumb.
And there's nothing to back it up.
Well, look
I reserve the right to call you an idiot.
Look at all the degrees of rules they've gone to in the NFL to protect the quarterback. And said we can't lose our quarterbacks. We got too much money in them. Blah blah blah. And look at where teams are at this point in the junction. They don't even have quarterbacks. But some of it, a guy was having a conversation the other day, Scott, and I tended to agree with it. He said, well, a lot of that may have something to do with the fact that there's some dual quarterbacks that like to run, and running is going to get you in that spot every time. And that's true, because the NFL is not having quarterbacks groomed to be pocket quarterbacks out of the college ranks anymore. So they're having to take first rounders and guys that don't sit in the pocket.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, you don't see many pocket passers in high school.
That's true.
They're running the 4 wide, and they're running the spread offenses. True. And the colleges have adapted to that offense, and those are the guys they're getting. And then when you get to college, they're not learning how to be pocket passers. And now you've got and this has been going on since, Michael Vick and people like that 15, 20 years ago. Now you're trying to adapt them to a pro-style game with the pocket, and that's just not the way it is.
And look at the guys that are quarterbacks. They're not the Peyton Mannings of the world, Scott. They don't stand there and throw 30 passes.
Realistically, that mess has been going on for 100 years, man. How many teams won national championships running the wishbone? Won national championship running the triple option? Mm-hmm. Running the RPO. I mean, it's just a different. And the problem there is, take a kid like Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is a hell of a football player, and he's going to be one of the all-time greats if he can. Number one, either they spend some money on him or they let him leave via free agency and he goes somewhere, with a team around him. But you look at a kid like that. When Trevor Lawrence got to the league, he's what, 20, 19, and he's playing against linebackers and offensive linemen that are grown-ass men.
Yeah.
34 years old, 32 years old.
And he was a starting quarterback as a 14-year-old high school freshman against 18-year-olds, and there's a difference.
Yeah.
But there's also a big difference between 21 and 27, 28
Absolutely there
guys
is.
that are doing this to put food on their table.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the point there. It always goes back to, when we talk about all these idiots online and it never fails I hate to single Alabama out because I'm not trying to be hateful about this, but it never fails. All the years that Alabama wins a national championship, inevitably the same conversation is going to be had every year. Boy, I tell you right now, you took that Alabama team right now and you put them against the worst team in the NFL, and they'd give them a run. They'd whoop them up down one side of the field. No, they wouldn't.
They wouldn't. Them for a quarter.
You're talking about 18 to 22-year-old kids playing a bunch of grown men. And I promise you, there ain't a pro team that played that game that would throw the first pass.
First of all,
they would line up and run every play.
And first of all, even though as talented as Bama is, every kid on that team
is not
to go to the NFL.
Nope.
But every team that's on that bad NFL team is in the NFL.
They're still professional athletes for a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, you do the math. There are 32 teams in the NFL with 53 players on the active roster per.
Yeah.
So, even you add in a practice squad and all, you're looking at roughly maybe 1,700 total. 1,700 total men in the United States, in the whole world, are good enough to play in the NFL.
Let somebody from Australia play if he's good enough.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some good punters and stuff coming out of Australia.
Have you seen this tight end from Utah that played rugby?
No.
Oh my God! I saw him play in the Rose Bowl the other day, and this guy's got good hands too.
Yeah.
And he was just running. Oh, he was in high school, and he's about the size he is now. He's probably about 6 foot.
He probably thinks everybody else on the field's a bunch of wusses for out there wearing pads.
And he was just mauling people.
Dude's probably got like 2 teeth in his entire head. Well, folks, it's been a fast and furious hour.
I meant to ask Rob.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What is today? 24 years ago today.
Oh, I'm being tested. 24 from today.
January 4th, 1999.
99. Did Prince bring something out then? Oh, the Tennessee Volunteers, led by
T. Martin, not Peyton Manning, ESPN.
I was going to say Phil Fulmer. Out in the desert.
Tostitos? Fiesta Bowl.
Florida State Seminoles, another team I grew up with.
Somehow was a 5.5-point underdog, even though Winky wasn't playing at quarterback. I never understood that.
27-year-old winter.
Yeah.
19-year veteran.
That's right.
Well, happy anniversary, all
To
you
the Vols.
all you Vols fans out there.
Thought it was
Chances
a
are you gonna be you probably gonna be contending for one before it's all said and done here in the next few years. SEC is about to be murderer's row when it comes to trying to win that conference. So, guys, we appreciate you being on with us. We'll be back same time, same channel next week. We love you guys. Y'all take it easy.